The NBCV investigative division reports that El Chapo's defense attorney has reignited a new offensive. At precisely 4:10 a.m. in the remote Sinaloa highlands, thermal scanners flared alive across a cluster of forgotten ranches. The readings weren't random steady waves of heat. Recurring air pulsing and faint mechanical rhythms beneath the ground told another story. Mexican Marines, in close coordination with U.S. intelligence partners, began a synchronized encirclement of several suspected hideouts, believed to shield high-ranking cartel figures under thick layers of concrete. If you stand behind real-world operations, that brings crime lords to justice. Hit subscribe because this mission shows how the balance of power shifts when federal strength and allied precision merge. For years, Mexico's most wanted trusted the comfort of bunker steel doors, camouflaged vents, secret escape shafts, and watchmen disguised as local farmers. That illusion collapsed the night Rafael Coroco Cano once hailed as the narco of narcos, linked to the 1985 torture and killing of DEA agent Enrique Kiki Camarena, was dragged from the brush. Exhausted after a failed escape from his underground refuge, he wasn't the only one captured. Vicente Carrillo, Fuentes of the Juarez cartel, and Miguel Z40 with Omar Z42, Trevico Morales of Los Zetas lineage, were all traced to reinforced sites that looked calm from the roadside but pulsed with hidden life beneath. Those bunkers were built to outlast raids, but they couldn't outlast data. What truly doomed the untouchables wasn't concrete, it was pattern recognition. Barns that never cooled, trucks that arrived only after dark, power lines pulling current from empty acres. Each clue betrayed the myth of invisibility. As the cordons closed, hinges ripped away and passageways opened into steel chambers stocked with supplies, radios, and medical kits, everything but an exit. The deeper investigators went, the clearer the strategy became. Treat every bunker not as a hiding place, but as a command post. Secure the node, sever the network. The captures weren't the finale, they were the spark. By first light, 29 cartel operatives were in custody across multiple states. Then came the unexpected twist. Mass extradition flights dispatching defendants to U.S. courts where charges had waited for years. Such transfers normally drag through endless red tape. Moving so many high-value detainees in one coordinated wave signaled something bigger. Policy pressure and timing had collided. Why would Mexico authorize so many extraditions at one sand? Why now? The answer lay in context. A new U.S. classification framework had elevated major cartels into the realm of national security threats, broadening surveillance powers and intensifying penalties for anyone offering material aid. The redefinition expanded the legal reach from smugglers to financiers, intermediaries, and weapon suppliers. Suddenly, any bunker serving as a meeting hub, stash point, or communications relay was no longer just a criminal site, it was a national security target. Underground no longer meant unseen, it meant marked. As extradition planes lifted skyward, analysts detected a new layer emerging, young lieutenants stepping into the void. Inside the tunnels, evidence teams gathered what matters most after the arrests. Ledgers, contact charts, relay phones, encryption codes. Every scrap of information turned a single victory into a chain reaction of disruption. Names led investigators toward Sonora and Tamaulipas. Payment slips traced to phantom importers. Maps revealed concealed airstrips and tunnel mouths. The deeper they read, the clearer the evolution became. Agile leaders giving way to faster, bolder successors. Bringing down kings doesn't dissolve the kingdom. It only rewrites the laws of succession. On both sides of the border, communities sensed the shift. This wasn't one headline-making capture. It was systemic pressure. Hidden bunkers laid bare, leadership dismantled, planes lifting with defendants, long shielded from justice. For the families of victims, hearing those long familiar names again meant closure at last. Caro Quintero now faced U.S. justice in the same case that had once ignited decades of anti-cartel resolve. Yet, even as the aircraft crossed into American airspace, surveillance analysts noticed the next phase forming movements near secondary caches, changing supply routes, encrypted channels, testing fresh keys. The bunker age had taken a fatal hit, but the network was already adapting. Behind the timing of those extradition flights lay the true lever of power. Economic pressure and international coordination strong enough to force a single, historic yes. When those 29 cartel chiefs touched down on U.S. soil, a second campaign was already in motion, one that would redefine how Washington classified its adversaries. That dawn, officials in the capital announced a sweeping shift. Mexico's largest cartels, were now formally designated as foreign terrorist organizations under a new federal framework. The move was more than rhetoric, it rewired the system itself. From that moment, anyone providing funds, weapons, vehicles, or safe havens to these groups could face the same penalties reserved for aiding global terror networks. For investigators, it meant the walls surrounding cartel power were finally collapsing from every direction. Asterisk with the new classification in place. U.S. agencies didn't waste a moment. What followed was codenamed Operation Take Back America, multi-layered initiative weaving intelligence, finance, and law enforcement into a single, relentless pursuit. The operation's origins stretched far deeper than headlines suggested. It began quietly, through digital trails, shell companies scattered across Miami, Houston, and Guadalajara, each tied by subtle financial echoes, repeating invoices, duplicate routing codes, and sudden cash surges that didn't fit any legal trade model. What looked like coincidence became coordination, and soon, patterns of laundering emerged like veins under fluorescent light. For years, cartel networks had mastered fragmentation, every cell operating in isolation, every courier believing the next link was invisible. Operation Takeback shattered that illusion. AI-driven analysis began linking fuel theft rings to gun runners, brokers to offshore accounts, and encrypted messaging to live tracking grids. The more data investigators fed the system, the clearer the architecture of the criminal ecosystem became. In the early months, agents targeted logistics freight lines, maritime hubs, even private aviation firms. To the public, these raids seemed routine. Inside intelligence circles, they marked a turning point. Seizing fuel trucks or cargo planes wasn't about stopping a single shipment. It was about unbalancing the machinery that kept billions in motion. Every confiscation created panic in upper tiers. With money flow disrupted, loyalty began to fracture. Informants appeared where silence once ruled. Back in Sinaloa, whispers spread. Cartel accountants vanishing. Regional managers caught in luxury condos or pulled from convoys before dawn. None of it was random. The arrests formed a grid pattern that mirrored the digital mapping of cartel command lines. Each node neutralized brought down dozens more. The deeper Operation Takeback went, the clearer the reality became. This wasn't just a drug war anymore. It was a global counter-network campaign. By mid-year, the Department of Justice confirmed dozens of joint indictments. Among them were businessmen who had never seen a jungle trail, yet their bank accounts had silently moved millions in washing operations. The strategy was deliberate. Follow the money before the gunfire. When financial arteries collapse, the body soon follows. Meanwhile, in Washington, new task forces aligned under the National Security Council's updated framework. Military analysts began assisting civilian agencies not to deploy troops, but to integrate satellite and drone intelligence for real-time oversight. For the first time, every raid could see beyond its own coordinates, adjusting mid-operation based on live feeds from Allied aircraft. The synergy produced results beyond expectation. Safe houses once thought impenetrable were stormed without resistance, their guards already neutralized by synchronized teams operating miles apart. The precision stunned even veteran officers. What had taken months in earlier eras now unfolded in a single night. On the ground, cameras captured a changing landscape. Desert roads lined with armored convoys, helicopters slicing through low clouds, and local officers coordinating through West's encrypted coms. Each mission bore the signature of exact timing and mutual trust, things rarely achieved in enforcement. Analysts called it the hybrid phase law. Enforcement adopting battlefield coordination, while still bound by the rule of law. This evolution blurred the old distinctions between policing and defense. The cartels, long operating like militias, were now being countered as such. Inside one captured compound, investigators uncovered something unexpected, a command screen displaying real-time U.S. police frequencies. Cartel tech teams had reverse-engineered civilian scanners into an early warning system. But that edge was the network had already been mirrored, its encryption keys seized, and its feeds rerouted to federal control. What once gave criminals foresight now gave agents surveillance advantage. Through hundreds of seizures, vehicles, properties, and crypto wallets, the message became unmistakable. No layer of disguise could withstand the new algorithmic chase. Each arrest triggered another, rippling outward across borders. Operation Takeback was no longer an operation. It was an ecosystem of enforcement feeding on momentum. As cartel leaders retreated, their replacements found themselves hunted by design. The system had adapted faster than they could reorganize. Those who once flaunted immunity were now reduced to fugitives in their own territories, blocked from banking, surrounded by surveillance, and cornered by allies turned informants. As Operation Takeback unfolded, it reshaped not only criminal networks, but the very definition of sovereignty. For decades, cartels thrived on the gaps between law's jurisdictions that stopped at the border, systems that couldn't see beyond their own maps. But now, those invisible lines had dissolved. Intelligence flowed seamlessly from D databases to Interpol terminals, from drone telemetry to courtroom exhibits. What once took months of diplomacy now happened in seconds of data exchange. Inside Mexico, that cooperation carried both relief and controversy. Critics accused authorities of surrendering autonomy, while supporters called it a long overdue reckoning. But one truth cut through. The debate toward ordinary citizens finally began to feel the difference. Communities once paralyzed by fear saw night skies lit, not by gunfire, but by the steady thrum of law enforcement helicopters. The symbols of power had shifted across rural strongholds. Seized airstrips turned into staging zones for humanitarian deliveries. Confiscated narco mansions were quietly repurposed into regional police academies. Each transformation symbolized more than justice, it was reclamation. Places once ruled by silence now echoed with the sound of training drills and radio checks. The most powerful shift, however, came in narrative. For years, the mythology of the untouchable cartel boss had fueled both fascination and despair. But as cameras captured one arrest after another, that legend began to erode. The message was clear. These weren't ghosts, they were men. And men can be caught. Inside U.S. intelligence briefings, the tone was cautiously optimistic. Success had come not from overwhelming force, but from precision replacing brute power. Patience replacing panic. The same digital networks that once carried illegal shipments now carried evidence. In essence, the cartel's strength had been turned against itself. Still, veterans of the fight warned that victory would not come overnight. Fragmentation meant survival. When one empire falls, splinters scatter and reform. The war was evolving, not ending. But for the first time in decades, those enforcing the law were adapting faster than those breaking it. Internationally, other nations took note. European and Asian agencies began replicating the integrated model, combining counter-terror data with anti-narcotics intelligence. What started as a single joint effort was becoming a blueprint for transnational enforcement. Back in Sinaloa, the once feared mountain corridors grew quiet. Villages once governed by cartels slowly reopened schools, relit churches, and revived markets. The silence that replaced gunfire wasn't emptiness, was recovery. For every fallen victim, every lost officer, and every shattered community, this calm was the justice they had been promised. As the camera pans over the rugged hills and reclaimed cities, a voice echoes the final truth of this saga. Power built on fear fades when confronted by unity. For years, they hid behind walls of steel and tunnels of earth, believing themselves untouchable. But when nations stand together, no tunnel is deep enough, no wall thick enough, and no empire strong enough to withstand the light of accountability. Because in the end, this isn't just a story of capture, it's the story of how a continent fought back. How a single mission in the dawn fog of Sinaloa became the blueprint for a global shift. And how, at last, the balance between darkness and justice began to tilt toward the light.